Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. This is the show where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us, and I am your host and producer, Olga Peters. I want to welcome regular contributor, Representative Emily Kornheiser from Brattleboro. Hello, Emily.
Good morning, Olga. So nice to see you today.
Nice to see you too, and welcome back to the show, but now no longer candidate or senator-elect. We are now welcoming new Senator Wendy Harrison. Hello, Wendy.
Good morning, Olga. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. And Wendy, for those who don't know her, she is also in Brattleboro and has just been assigned to the Senate Committee on Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, as well as assigned as vice chair to the Senate Committee on Institutions. So congratulations with those committee assignments. Were they ones you were hoping to get, or what interested you when you kind of put your hat in the ring for committee assignments?
Right. Thanks, Olga. It's a good question. While I was campaigning, I was really looking at government ops and transportation. I also have a big interest in economic development. So I was hoping to get on that committee if I didn't get on the other two. And what's going to be fun about economic development and housing is that those are two things that are really important to the state and to our region. So I'll be working on those and using the experience that I have. And we can talk more about that if you like. And the other committee was not on my radar, but I'm excited about it. It's institutions. And what that committee does is make the 2-year capital plan for state buildings and lands. And it also works with the Department of Corrections, which is a pretty serious and important operation. So we haven't yet had our first meeting, so I'm learning what I can from the internet, but I'm looking forward to learning from the folks who know what they're doing.
And
thank you.
Would love, just for listeners, I know we've talked before about how in the House the Speaker chooses the committee assignments entirely, but in the Senate, committee assignments are chosen by the incredibly named Committee on Committees. And the Committee on Committees is made up of the presiding officer of the Senate, who is the Lieutenant Governor, the pro tem of the Senate, and then the incredibly well-named third member, which is an official name, the third member. And that has been Senator Mazza since the beginning of time. And so those three men right now choose all of the committee assignments. And it's sort of interesting because senators get their committee assignments much later than House members because the lieutenant governor needs to get sworn in, the pro tem needs to get officially elected. All of that has to happen before they can officially meet and announce committees. So that's a fun little twist on the whole weird ritualistic proceedings that we engaged in last week.
Right.
And it should be noted that senators serve on 2 committees where House members only serve on 1. Is that correct, Emily?
Yes.
Sorry, Wendy, I cut you off.
No worries. And that process made last week particularly exciting because we were all waiting to get our committee assignments on the Senate side, and we didn't receive them until Thursday, which obviously is because of the processes that we need to go through. But it was nice to finally get the assignments.
Yeah,
you don't
even know where to put your stuff until you have your committee assignments, because we don't have offices at the State House.
Right.
We just have our seats in our committee rooms. And in each committee room, we have a drawer, usually. And that drawer is like it's like your locker, except it's like a pretty wooden drawer. It's not like a metal locker, but that's like that's your only real home base.
So I have a little piece of homework for both of you. with the drawers.
Yes.
I would love it if you guys would, you folks would take a photo of your drawer when you get to the session this week, when you get to the State House, and then at the end of the session, take a picture of your drawer again. And I think we will have a visualization of the year based
I
on
love that.
what's inside those drawers.
I actually, as a committee chair, I get a larger drawer.
Ooh, so you can really pack stuff in there.
I don't get paid any more measly money. I have way more work, but I do get a larger drawer, and actually a drawer and a half. So I am sort of embarrassingly excited about the extra shoe room, to be perfectly honest with all of our listeners.
That's funny. Yeah,
Well,
my
I
goal
look
is,
forward to the photos.
yeah, that's great. Actually, something I am working on is how to organize all of these things. With two committees and the what happens on the floor. I'm looking to experienced senators and reps to give me advice on how they organize all of their stuff. And there's a lot of paper.
I'm going to walk off screen for 1 second and come back, because I have.
Oh, cool.
Show and tell,
Cool.
show and tell.
Yeah. This is real life advice show, right?
Yeah.
Well,
So-
I'm interested to hear you say that, Wendy, that you're curious about how you organize all these things, because one thing I love about your background as a senator is that you're coming from the municipal sphere. You know, you've been the town manager for several towns in Vermont and or town administrator. So I would think, you know, between organizing a town and keeping a select board up to date and everything, you would have your organizational skills like down.
But there's no office, Olga.
Right. And there's no, well, there's shared staff, which is good. But when you go into a town, they've already established systems. They may not always be the best or the most effective systems, but they are working, you know, that things are moving along. So in this case, it's more my personal, you know, they're not my personal because of my personal life, but they're my particular notes and documents, like what should I save, what should I not, that, you know, that kind of thing. I don't know yet what will be helpful and what I can throw away or recycle. But
So,
Emily can help me figure that out.
Okay. So one difference is that we're allowed to bring electronics onto our floor, and you are not allowed to bring electronics onto the Senate floor, which is absurd nonsense, but
It keeps us focused.
I guess.
For our radio listeners, 14 emotions and expressions just like flew across Emily's face in that moment.
So, but I still need to go between meetings, my committee room, home, floor, all those places. And I find carrying a bag from those places to places sort of, I don't really want to carry a bag everywhere I go. And then like it's actually really hard to find a spot to stash the bag.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I have one of these lovely, fancy portfolios that actually Congresswoman Ballant bought for me when I was first elected.
Oh, nice.
So I'm sorry I didn't buy you one, Wendy.
That's okay. You're showing it to me. That's just as important.
I am. Mine was handmade and it's from Etsy, but you could probably get one at Staples if you are not so obsessive as I am. But so I keep like ongoing notes here, and then I slide my iPad in here that I have a keyboard for. And it fits in here. My phone fits in here. And then I hang my badge here, because sometimes I don't have pockets to click my badge into. But it all fits right there. I very rarely retain documents. I print things, I keep everything in Google Drive so that I can use it between my iPad and my laptop.
Okay.
If I save it onto either of those places, then I can't keep it on my lap. I can't use it in both devices, and that way I don't have to carry devices from place to place. So that works really well for me. And then I will print things if I'm going to read them on the House floor, as you would, you'd want to print anything you're bringing to the Senate floor. But I make sure there's an electronic backup. And if someone gives me something that I don't have the original for, I take a picture of it and I save it into my Google Drive, because I cannot with all the paper. It's too much, because there's no home for the paper, right?
Right.
And so that's what I do. It works really well for me. And then I just carry this thing sort of like under my arm or like this as I'm walking around.
That's great. So then
Yeah.
after you take notes in a meeting or whenever, you take a photograph of that.
Yeah,
and
or I often will take
scan
notes on my
Okay.
iPad in a meeting.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And then-
Which you have a keyboard for, because.
Which I have a keyboard for. And if you don't actually have a keyboard for your laptop, for your iPad, Wendy, I, in fact, bought an extra one sort of by accident, and I'm happy to pass it
Ooh.
on to you.
Sure.
So-
We can do a little interchamber.
Mhm. And then I
Cooperation.
also buy these little journals that I take notes in, but it's mostly like retaining needing notes. It's just sort of like notes for the emotional sake of taking notes.
Hmm.
And like at the end of the week, I'll sort of like scan through it and say, like, is any of this actually worthy of carrying on? And then I save I hope listeners are interested in this. I don't know if they are.
I'm interested, because
I'm
I'm always
super
juggling so many
interested.
plates.
And then, and so I like take, if there's anything actually retainable in all of that, I will certainly like copy it down somewhere else or move it somewhere else. But mostly I just carry around these little things because they're so little and light. And then I save them for posterity, but like I just have a shelf over here that I'm not going to scan the camera to.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Deep in the office over there. But I don't ever look at them again. They just save them.
But they're there in case.
They're there in case. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Great.
Mhm.
Great. That's
Yeah.
helpful. Thank you. Because I used this little book
Yeah.
to take notes when I was campaigning.
Oh, it's
I'm
like the
still-
exact same. I think it's the same. It's like yours is like a moleskin one, right?
Right.
Yeah. No,
Cool.
I think that system works. And then I keep my committee agendas right here.
Okay.
First top document, because that's what tells me where I need to go and when.
And you are a chair of a very important committee. The
That
chair.
is the rumor. Yes.
No one's told her otherwise yet.
Oh, really? Oh my goodness. Okay.
No, it's true. Yes, I am. I'm just kidding. Yes. I am the chair of Ways and Means Committee. Yes.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for actually sharing that with us, Emily, because I always think organization and time management is interesting. It's one of those things that a lot of people just assume that you either are or you aren't. And it's a learned skill, just like anything else. And so whenever we can kind of share these things and make each other's lives easier.
No, and
all for it.
frankly, I had a very easy time in school until I got to college. And so I never actually had to learn study skills whatsoever, organizational skills, because I just like coasted on through. And so it was a lot to like learn those things as an adult. I also have, if we're just gonna, should I like add a few other things?
Sure, go
Sure.
for it.
Yeah, okay. I also have one Google Doc that's my next week's newsletter that I pop things into as they come up that I think constituents would want to know.
Mhm.
And then I just sort of like actually write it at the end of the week. But it's usually populated with like items, and that sort of Google Doc is usually like close to the top of open documents. And then I have another Google Doc that's all of the sort of committee priorities and the status of them in like a table format. And then I have a third Google Doc that is usually a Google spreadsheet that's bills I sponsored and the status of those.
Okay.
And like hyperlinks to all the pieces of that. So I have like 3 sort of master documents of things that I need to track.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, that's good. That's very
Mhm.
smart.
And it's sort of weird, like it's not like a workplace, because in a workplace, people give you the systems of that
Mhm.
workplace. And we
Right.
don't, there are no systems that are handed over when you become a new legislator. It's actually sort of remarkable.
Mhm.
Right. And different organizations, some use Google, some use Trello, some most governments use Microsoft products, but
Mhm.
yeah, it is interesting. One thing that struck me in orientation, and I think it's true, is how effective the shared staff is from a legislating perspective, you know, aside from the individual requirements, but having it's about 20, I think, of folks on the legal side and folks on the financial side who are available to both chambers, and the individuals specialize. So there's particular folks for transportation and for government and for economic development, and they, because they work for all of us, they know what's happening, and they'll write bills that oppose each other, but that's fine. That's honestly what town managers do too, is they work for individuals who may want to do different things, but they work for everyone equally because that's their job. And so far, I've been really impressed with the staff and how accessible they are and knowledgeable, and it's really good. And I think Vermont is fortunate to have them because they make us more effective, or effective at all, honestly.
Yeah,
that's my initial. Yeah, is that what you see, Emily?
Oh my God, yeah, they're like the most, I mean, extraordinary, kind, patient, hardworking, organized batch of people. And they do so much of their work like perched on the edge of a bench while there's a million things going on around them. I mean, it's amazing.
Right.
Well, you know, once again, you talk about systems. This is a state house where people arrive at different points with skill sets and experience and understanding of the legislative process. And how do you keep that ship moving in the same direction when you have so much variety coming in the front door at the beginning of the year?
Right. And especially this year, I mean, 30% in both houses are new folks. And our pro tem made a point in his speech to us that it was critical to value both the energy and new ideas of the new folks and the experience and wisdom of the folks who've been here for a while. So that seems exciting to me. I mean, I think I would be excited no matter what was happening, but everyone seems to be excited, so that's good.
So for you, oh, go ahead, Emily.
Go
Sorry.
ahead.
I was just going to say, for you, Wendy, you know, as a new lawmaker, what was it like the first day you walked into the Senate chamber and you're like, here I am, I'm a senator? Like, what were some of the thoughts or feelings that?
Yeah. It feels unbelievable. Just the majesty of the place and of the rooms is incredible. It was great to have orientation because that gave us a taste of it. But then when it was real and we were taking the oath, which is a very long oath, it's kind of like 3 oaths together. It's humbling, and it really does provide me, and I'm sure the others, just the feelings that you need to go ahead and do the work and think about what's best for all of us. And that's why we do it in a group, right? Because no one of us can know what's important to the entire state. And in fact, not even all of us in the state house can know what's important to everyone. That's why the reaching out is critical too. So no, it was a wonderful feeling. My family was there. My family who couldn't be there were watching on YouTube as they kept reminding me. And I was trying not to get distracted by them. But it's exciting. It's very cool.
Very cool. Wonderful.
Yeah, you know, as I'm sort of moving more into the role of elder statesman, after feeling like really still brand new last biennium, but with so much turnover last biennium and this biennium in the state house, like just, you know, entering my 5th year means I am, you know, experienced. It's become clearer and clearer to me how many of the habits or rituals have real purpose for the functioning of the proceedings. So, you know, even the fact that we don't have offices, which there are certainly days where I want somewhere to go hide, or to feel like I have a home base. One, it means that we all need to be sort of in communication with each other all the time. which is very helpful for sort of public discourse. But it also means that we are sort of even more aware of the fact that we are not there as individuals and we don't own that space as individuals, but in fact, we are just sort of, you know, the representative from Brattleboro or the senator from Windham County, right? Even this sort of way that the chambers are laid out really helps us remember that we are there sort of in our, as vessels of our seats, not as individuals who are, you know, important in and of themselves.
I totally agree with you. And you get a sense of time that not only like in the layer of the present are we just one of many, but then if you look at time back, you know, back and forth, but you know, past and future, we're just in that link too. So in multi dimensions, we're occupying a seat rather than being ourselves, and not looking and intentionally occupying a seat that has responsibility for others. Yeah, it's humbling.
Those are such good reminders, because there's so many places, especially in American culture and American workplaces, for example, where power is sort of based on that king of the mountain game. And to have that continue to know you're part of a continuum, and to know that you're there to represent rather than just be your ego. Like, that's a very important process, not just humbling, but I think that's an important place for us to sit in as human beings from time to time. We have just a few minutes left before the end of this, the first half of the show. And in the second half, Wendy, I really want to talk about the committee work and some of the policy things you were interested in when you were running. But before we leave to hear from some of our underwriters, I'm wondering, have you had enough of a time, Wendy, to kind of sit with what you were expecting and reality? Like, you know, during the campaign, I'm sure you formed a bunch of expectations of what it would mean if you were elected, and now you're here. And I'm wondering if you've had a kind of chance to process those two spaces.
Good question. I heard, and this is me personally, I really didn't know what it would feel like. So I did have imaginings, but I'm always ready for something to be different than what I expect. That's just the way my life has been, is it hasn't been what I've expected. And I kind of like that, honestly. You know, I like learning and just being surprised. I think I have to be ready, right? Because it's happening. And everyone else is in the same situation that I am. I mean, all of the new folks, none of us have done this before. So we're just going to do our best.
Thank you. Have you had a chance to, my favorite place in the State House is actually the lunchroom, because I think that's where so many great conversations happen. Have you had a chance to hang out in the lunchroom yet? Totally.
And actually, I like it for breakfast. There's oatmeal, which is huge for me. So yeah, I like that room. And I'm learning that there are different parts where particular groups go, and that is something I want to challenge a little bit. You know, I want to move around and sit in different places and meet different people. Mix it up a bit.
Well, and I think, you know, the Senate Institutions Committee has historically been sort of the Republican stronghold in the Senate, and has the only Republican chair. And so I think you'll have some really good opportunities to get to know some folks who might not be your natural allies, which will also ease your way through mixing it up in the lunchroom, I think.
That makes sense. And that was a nice
Interesting.
thing about the orientation too, is we met as individuals and not party members. So
Mhm.
I did meet the Republican colleagues, 2 of them, and that was good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I do
So
not like the cafeteria.
Oh,
It
no.
is. I didn't like my high school cafeteria, and feels remarkably similar in a way that's strange. I do like it in the morning. It's much slower and like
Mhm.
gentler and quieter. During lunchtime, it is just very, very loud, and I have a hard time focusing on conversations because there's so much hubbub
Mhm.
and sort of vying that's happening.
Do you have a favorite space in the State House, or do you not want to share it? Because then it will become
Oh, yeah.
like the space.
Oh,
for
actually,
everyone.
I love the Senate chairs in the House chamber. That's one of my top
Mm.
favorite spots. Not during, when the senators aren't there, it's like a really nice place to sort of settle in and have a quiet conversation with someone. And then at the end of 2 of the committee hallways, there are these very large windowsills
Mhm.
that are not very well insulated. And so you can like get a little bit of fresh air and have a little bit of quiet. Those are probably my top 2 favorite spots. Yeah. Wendy, have you found spots yet?
I actually really like the window seats in the that lobby that's outside of the House chamber.
Mhm. That's called the Hall of Flags.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I like those window seats so far. I really just, I love the building. I mean, it's just
It's a great building.
cool. I like the carpets. They're fun.
Mhm.
Yeah. When I have a favorite, I'll let you guys know, but I might just not play favorites. I might just like the whole building.
Well, I'm sure the building would appreciate that.
Especially being on institutions, I really need to like the whole building.
Yes. Well, we are out of time for this first half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. We're going to hear from some of our underwriters and then be right back.
Thank you for asking.
Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. You can also find us on Brattleboro Community Television and many of the PEG stations around Vermont and a little bit in New England. We've kind of jumped the border in a couple places, as well as wherever you find your podcasts, and you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts. If you're just joining us, this is the show where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. I'm your host, Olga Peters, and I'm speaking with Representative Emily Kornheiser and Senator Wendy Harrison. Hey, Emily.
Hey, Olga.
What do we remind listeners of about this time?
The views and opinions expressed here on the Montpelier Happy Hour are those of the host and the guests, respectively, and not their family, friends, neighbors, employers, nor the station platform that is playing our words.
Why, thank you very much. So, Wendy, I loved the conversation and in the first half of the show. I would like to turn now to more policy and committee discussions. So for those who are just joining us, Wendy is a new senator for Windham County, and she has been appointed to the Senate Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs, as well as named vice chair for the Senate Committee on Institutions. So, Wendy, you had said in the first half of the show that you had really wanted to be on economic development, housing, and general affairs. What was it about that committee that caught your attention?
The combination of economic development and housing, and it's also the committee. The actual language is all matters relating to subjects for which there is no other appropriate committee. So it's the committee.
They didn't just want to call it the kitchen sink committee?
Right. So it's the miscellaneous committee.
So you get like burial practices in there. It's pretty awesome.
Oh, interesting. All
Mhm.
right. So I said I liked surprises. So there you go. I'm involved in economic development already in the state. Locally, I'm chair of SEVEDS. It's Southeast Vermont Economic Development Strategies. It's a function of BDCC, the economic development folks here. And what I really like about economic development is equitable economic development, so that we're not just, the government is not paying companies to relocate and then just washing their hands and saying that's that. It's really important when we use public resources to make sure that all of the public benefits. So there are certain types of companies that would be helpful here. But even if we wanted to do the old kind of economic development, we couldn't, because our problem is workforce. We don't have workforce. And not only for private sector, but for the public sector too. And BDCC identified this years ago and started working on how to encourage folks to move to our area. And we actually did have an increase in our census numbers in Windham County. And the refugee resettlement program is part of that. And another thing I really like about what BDCC does, and it may be happening in other parts of the state too, is looking at the whole system. So it's important to have the refugee resettlement program here, but then we also need to make sure that we're a welcoming community for the refugees. And that includes working with employers, working with churches, so that we are ready as employers and as neighbors to welcome them, because it's hard to move to a new place, obviously, and it's really hard to move when you didn't want to move in the first place. I mean, it's trauma. There's no way it could not be traumatic to be forced violently from your country. So that's really what I'm sorry.
I'm really I have sort of two threads I want to follow, but one of them is just saying, I think, the way refugee resettlement has happened in Windham County, which was very sort of driven by a coalition led by our economic development agency, is so different from how the vast majority of refugee resettlement has happened in Vermont, which is in the Burlington area and led by human services agencies. And so I think it's going to be, as that plays out in the State House, as requests for more resources come from both corners of the state, I'm curious to see how those groups sort of come together at the state level to have better outcomes and appropriate resources. One of the things that fascinates me about your committee, Wendy, is that in the House, the labor law is in one committee and economic development is in another committee. But in the Senate, those two committees those two House committees both funnel into your single Senate committee. And
which seems to make more sense.
It does. And I think there's something to be said for, the checks and balances of separate committees on something like that sometimes too, right? And so I really like that they come together in the Senate, but they're separate in the House. So I'm curious about sort of your thinking on that, or if that's something that you've bringing those two pieces together.
Yeah, it's funny. I noticed that, I mean, we obviously haven't gotten to substantial conversations yet. Yeah. We're just learning about what we do. But just in my jobs in Vermont, I've noticed that the labor laws are very different than labor laws that I've experienced elsewhere. And I think it'll be a good thing to have jurisdiction over both of them. And partially because that will force us to be speaking with folks who like labor folks might not necessarily speak with the corporate interests. But not only will the committee get to see both sides, but I would imagine that the witnesses and the folks who will be watching what we do will see both sides, or at least have the opportunity to. The corporate folks will will see that we're doing something on labor, and they might just pay, watch differently than they would otherwise. But I'm speculating. I really don't know.
So,
But I like the breadth, and I like having housing in it too,
Mhm.
because housing is so much of a part of economic development, and just not even just economic health
mhm.
and person health, community health. Housing is so important to that, and we're getting pretty creative in housing in Vermont. We have to, and I look forward to helping with that.
I wanted to just, sorry, there's a very big plow going past, or truck or something. Um, I just want to touch base on something you said, Wendy, see if you can give us some examples. You talk about labor laws in Vermont being different than other places you have worked. Can you give us some highlights or some examples?
One example that comes to mind is there's a requirement on when people have to receive a paycheck based on when the work was done. And I
Mhm.
wasn't familiar with that, I never saw that in any other places. And I think that's good. It's good for the employee. And
Mhm.
anytime there's a law like that, it means that it didn't happen. There was a requirement to have a law like that, right?
It was needed.
Yeah, yeah. So that's one that comes to mind. But most of what I've seen has been much more protective of employees
Mhm.
than it was elsewhere.
Thank you. I like to ask questions like that because for our listeners, we don't know how many people have actually worked outside of Vermont. And if that's the water you've always been swimming in, you may not know that things are done differently elsewhere in the world, for better or for worse.
Right. That's interesting. Yep. That's a good idea.
Um, let's go back to housing, if you don't mind. Um, I have been in my reporting really come to a point for a lot of folks, a lot of communities, where I'm hearing housing workforce, housing workforce, housing workforce are like their big barriers. And it's such a chicken and an egg right now. Like maybe they can find workers, but then the workers can't find housing. That type of thing. So what are some of the housing issues that are kind of at the forefront of your mind right now as you're going into this committee work?
Well, more safe, accessible housing. I mean, the state needs more safe, accessible housing. And Brattleboro did a housing study that showed a need for, I thought it said 1,000 units. Now we're saying 500 units. So I don't know if we're dividing it into years, but a significant number of units. And there are folks keeping track of how we're doing. I was kind of surprised that the state is, well, I shouldn't say that. The state may be keeping track, but I haven't seen that yet.
Not keeping track.
Oh, yeah, we might want to do a better job of that.
We've had many conversations about data or the lack thereof
Yeah.
on this show.
Okay. Yeah, all right, it's good to hear from Emily. And that's where, yeah, so obviously we know we need more. Some of us think we know how many we need. I think it's really important that we have, and others do too, just housing of all types, so that folks of all income levels and interests and abilities can find housing. I especially want housing in places where there's transportation, that are walkable, that are bikeable, and those types of active, accessible communities. That's what the public wants too. That's what people want to, where people want to live. And many people coming from other states are looking for that, for that traditional, friendly, active social community. So that's a real strength that we have. And I know that we can renovate buildings that need love, and keep what's wonderful about Vermont while luring folks to come here.
Mhm. And what about solutions? I know that you've just been assigned to the committee, but are you starting to hear possible pathways forward for some of our housing issues?
Well, the state did a lot of work last year,
Mhm.
and established and put a lot of money, a lot of the ARPA money into housing. We obviously need more workers on the housing construction side, and so that's something that I'm paying attention to. Shoot, I wish I had it in front. There's an event this week at the technical center in Springfield. There's also one at the tech center in Brattleboro.
Hmm.
And if you guys probably have a website or somewhere that I can give you the
Mhm.
information so we can let people know. But they're doing outreach to find out, the Department of the State, who is in charge of these institutions, is doing outreach to see how those centers are meeting the needs of the students. So it'd
Mhm.
be great to have a good turnout. I visited the Springfield one a few years ago, and it's amazing. It's huge. It has all sorts of programs. It'd be nice to have more usage of that by folks in Windham County. I know Bellas Falls residents can use that facility. I don't know if
No,
folks
we down here, it's the Windham Southeast Tech Center is sort of where anyone needs to go to. And so Rep Tolino, Tristan Tolino, actually did a decent amount of work last year to both think about how we can better regionalize and support our technical centers, how they can actually be useful to students. And then this coming year, we're actually getting a study to make sure that how we're paying for that doesn't disincentivize the use of it. So I think there's a lot to be done on, on the trades and building out the trades. One thing that I think is interesting in terms of housing policy that's probably going to move forward is that a lot of some of the initial work on housing policy that's being promoted this year and would make a really difference in some other areas of the state is stuff that Brattleboro has already done voluntarily. So we've done a huge rewriting of our zoning provisions. And so a lot of what limits development in other communities is actually municipal level zoning, exclusionary principles and practices. And that's something that we actually don't have in Brattleboro anymore. And so what limits us, other than money and people, but the sort of laws that limit us are in a lot of cases, sort of right to appeal laws, and how much time that eats up and how that's balanced, how sort of community need is communicated in those instances. And then how government agencies are coordinated that require clearances, which is something that's very hard to legislate, though we do our best. And then wastewater for communities outside, for the village centers. And we've had Chris Campany from the Windham Regional Commission here enough times talking about nothing but wastewater. So we're not going to get into that today. But that would take, if say Newfane and Putney could support more population, then Brattleboro might have a little bit of a lessening around our downtowns. So I feel sort of, I think there's a lot of potential around some reforms, but it's one of those places where I feel a little bit nervous that like what's going to feel like a big accomplishment statewide isn't actually going to make an impact in my little neck of the woods.
Interesting. Well, you have to expand your idea of your neck of the woods.
Sure. Yeah. I don't actually, because I'm a state rep, not a senator.
That's funny.
Switching to institutions, Wendy, you had said at the top half of the show that this was a surprise. This one wasn't really on your radar. But I'm curious, what is exciting you about it now that you're here?
Two main things. One is just good use of public resources.
Mhm.
I've done a lot of capital planning, and in small towns, that's often not done because you just don't have time for it. But it really does make sense. And in the long run, it saves the community money, and
Mhm.
it's better use of just other resources. So I'm looking forward to finding out how the state does capital planning.
Mhm.
And the state does bonding. That's another thing that's different about Vermont, is other states do bonding in almost like corporations, or I should say the municipalities within the state,
Mhm.
just go to the market and get bond funding. But in Vermont, so as far as I know it now, the municipalities have to use the state bonding mechanism, that was pretty interesting to me. At first I was like, why? But I think it's good. It's good so far from what I can see. And it'll just be really good to learn more, because
Mhm.
that's really interesting to me, is how we do things at the lowest cost and effectively. Because if planning is good, you have to be prepared for unforeseen circumstances, but it's really good to have a plan, because then when you deviate from the plan, how to get back on track. So that's exciting. And then corrections, it's
Wait, before we get to corrections, I just
sure.
want to ask something about sort of the institution side of the corrections and institutions. We talk a lot on this show about the oversized role that state government has in Vermont, given just how small our population is. And we talk a lot about sort of the power of state government to set labor conditions. But what we really haven't talked about very much is the power of state government to set sort of like institutional and infrastructure decisions. And that's sort of an interesting, it's an interesting part of what you do, Wendy. Like, what does the state own? I know in some communities, state property takes up a huge amount of that community's footprint and really shapes things. And so I'm really interested in like, if that's, what that's going to look like for you.
Oh, that's interesting. So you would actually know, Emily, if this committee does, if it handles the pilots, the payment in lieu of taxes for state buildings.
It has a very large role in that. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't had
even like that's also appropriations and the tax committees, because it's part of sort of grand list stuff. Yeah.
And we haven't even had our first meeting, so I'm going blind on this one.
But you were just about to start talking about corrections.
Yeah, just corrections is just so important, and I want to learn more. I mean, I don't want to publicly state opinions now, because I just don't know enough. But it needs to be done right, and we need to care for the folks who are living in our institutions.
Yeah. I mean, it's really like the idea, folks are we use the phrase in state's custody. And we often use that phrase casually, but that's like a very weighty charge, is that like, the state is responsible, has declared itself against someone's will responsible for their well-being and care. And like, how do we actually carry that out is a really interesting question.
For clarity, and I'm sorry, I don't know this, but the Committee on Institutions and Corrections, is your purview with corrections just the physical buildings, or corrections policies, like everything across the board?
So bizarrely, it's everything across the board. It's
Interesting.
really
Okay.
anything, you know, judiciary handles anything until someone's sentenced. But from then on, like probation and parole, all of that is within the Corrections and Institutions Committee. It's not just the actual jail infrastructure. It's the Medicaid, you know, it's the medical services, which is not covered by Medicaid, that happens inside the jail. It's, you know, integration of services on the outside. It's yeah, it's pretty wild, especially considering I think we're the only state in the country whose corrections department actually sits within our Agency of Human Services.
Hmm.
So it's funny that our legislative committees don't reflect that.
Right.
Funny.
Interesting.
Not funny. It's not really funny. And I, you know, on my more philosophical anxiety days, feel concerned that the committee that's like really focused on sort of budgets and the capital bill and infrastructure might pay more attention to the jail and less attention to the people in the jail. And I know that like, that's not fair of me, you know, like everyone is capable of doing both sides of that equation, but I do sometimes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, it's a huge responsibility, and I need to learn more. I need to go to the. I did go on a. I toured the Springfield facility as part of a leadership program, and I want to see the others, and I want to see that one more recently.
Thank you, Wendy. Just we've come to the end of this episode, but before we go, anything you want to leave listeners with, Wendy, before?
Please do get in touch with me if you have questions. We have regular open houses. Emily has been gracious enough to invite Nader and I to the Brattleboro community event,
which is this weekend.
We have one coming this Saturday. I may actually go to Vernon this Saturday. I haven't talked to Emily yet about that, but I will typically be at those. If you have ideas, let me know. I've updated my website. I'm gonna hopefully that will be helpful. We have a lot of different sources of information, and I am trying to find a way to consolidate that a little bit. I don't know. I should say I'm on the lookout for ways to consolidate sources of information, because I think that would be helpful to the public. But thank you for putting me in this position, and I'm really excited, and I'm going to do my best.
Well, we are glad to have you in the Senate, Wendy. What's the website so people can find you?
It's Wendy 4 WindhamVT.org.
Perfect. And I'll link it in the show notes as well when I put this online. Emily, oh, of course, you're very welcome. Emily, if people want to get in contact with you, how do they do that?
Folks can go to emilykornheiser.org and you will find links to all of my email accounts and social media accounts, as well as way to sign up for my weekly newsletter, weekly-ish newsletter.
And as always, the Montpelier Happy Hour can be found at 2 p.m. on Friday on WVW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station, as well as our Captivate page and wherever you find your podcasts. You can drop us a line at the Montpelier Happy Hour at gmail.com whenever the fancy takes you. Wendy Harrison, new senator for Windham County, thank you so much for joining us today. And everyone else, have a great weekend.